Okay, hello you all. Welcome to our lecture material on companion animal or pet loss. I use companion animals sometimes because it's a little bit broader and encompasses animals like llamas or horses that people don't always think of as pets. I have a lot to say about this, and I also know that you're going to be thinking a lot about the animals that you've loved and lost. Okay, so in this lecture material, you can expect that first I'm just going to tell you more about my work at the CSU Veterinary Teaching Hospital and what kind of work they're still doing. Then we're going to talk about factors that can strengthen our attachment to companion animals. Then factors that we'll do that factors influencing grief model again, but specific to pet loss. We'll talk more about client-present euthanasia, how you can help before, during, and after death. When is it time to get a new pet? Children and pet loss, and memorializing our pets. So as I've probably mentioned to you, I worked at the CSU Veterinary Teaching Hospital for 3 years, from 1998 to 2001, so that's a lot of years ago now. It was my first job after I'd finished my master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And I had experience with hospice and facilitating grief groups. My dad is also a professor of veterinary medicine. My mom's also a grief counselor, so it was kind of a natural job for me. And I essentially worked like a social worker in a human hospital. We had a team of several counselors. We carried pagers. We responded to emergency situations like a horse that would be colicking, or an animal that had been hit by a car, or an animal that had died in surgery. We also helped people make treatment decisions, whether or not they wanted to do this really expensive surgery or not. Euthanasia decisions, and I'll talk more about that, knowing when the right time is and whether or not they wanted to be present, and then preparing people and facilitating client-present euthanasia. I probably was present at, I'm guessing, 100 euthanasias during those 3 years of all sorts of animals, exotic animals, cats, dogs, large animals like horses and llamas. And then we also provided brief grief counseling, so maybe 1 to 3 sessions in person or over the phone. We also really always worked with kids, helping support them through euthanasia or providing grief support. We provided phone support over the phone or in person, and so sometimes to people around the nation we would give a 30-minute free phone call. I also taught veterinary students and veterinarians how to communicate with people during tough times. So we had classes and gave a lot of professional presentations during that time. Okay, I'd encourage you to watch this video, even though it was made in 1998, right before I started my job there. ABC's 2020 came to CSU to showcase what was called the Changes Program. Now it's called the Argus Institute. It is unparalleled in introducing us to this topic. It does, however, feature 2 client-present euthanasias, and so can be tough. One euthanasia is at the Animal Medical Center in New York. I don't think that's as well facilitated, in my opinion. And then the second euthanasia is at the CSU Veterinary Teaching Hospital, and a really powerful and excellent example of a well-facilitated client-present euthanasia. Okay, so because the CSU Veterinary Teaching Hospital is a referral hospital, meaning people had started with their local vet who said, I can't do anything more for you. If you want treatment, you're going to have to go to someplace like CSU. So these are people who generally had high attachments to their animals and resources to be able to support treatment. And so here were the things that we noticed that often created a stronger attachment to animals. One was if they rescued this companion animal, they rescued the horse or they rescued the dog or the cat from a situation where there was maltreatment. And then this would be doubled if they themselves had been, this attachment would even be stronger if they themselves had maltreatment when they were growing up and wished someone had been able to rescue them. If people feel safer with animals rather than people, maybe they've gotten the short end of the stick in their life and people haven't been that safe for them, but animals have. If this animal got them through a tough time, a move, a breakup, a death, a divorce, and was kind of their sole source of support, those things strengthen attachment. if they believe the animal saved their life. So occasionally we had someone who would come in and say, this dog detected cancer or knew that I was going to have a heart attack and went and got help. I worked with a woman who flew in from another country, and in that country she had been held up at gunpoint, and her dog jumped out of the window of the car and attacked the attackers and basically saved her. So she was willing to do anything, for this dog. If the animal is a link to other loved ones, so I remember working with a couple whose daughter had died some years ago, and this was her cat. I worked with a woman whose husband, I think he was maybe a tree trimmer, and he died in a terrible way, electrocuted in a tree in a freak accident, and this was his dog, or their dog together. And so she was re-grieving him as she was grieving this dog. Okay, so you remember this model, factors influencing dying or grieving. So characteristics of the bereaved, we've talked about that some on the previous slide. And then characteristics of the companion animal. So what's the attachment, level of attachment to the animal? What's the symbolism? How does it link to other eras of your life or other people in your past? What's the age of the animal? Obviously, it's tough when animals die too young, but it can also be hard to lose an animal that has been with you for 2 decades or 3 decades in the cases of, for example, cats or horses. The species matters, whether or not this is an animal that's considered more of a valid pet, or do people kind of raise their eyebrows that you're grieving, for example, a reptile? Is it an animal that can sleep in bed with you? Or is it an animal like a horse that people often describe as having a psychic connection with, and also is an animal that you have to have so much trust in because they could kill you, accidentally? What are the characteristics of the death event? So obviously when it was sudden or preventable, that's pretty tough. Very common, but also tough. And as I may have mentioned, I worked with a number of people who contributed to the death of their pet, as I've experienced in my life, where you've left the gate open, or they got out, or you let them out, or I worked with people who accidentally ran over their dogs with a car, or shot the dog on a hunting trip. Worked with people whose cats, died because they got caught up on the cords on blinds, or the garage door got shut on an animal. So pretty horrible situations, and that's tough because that leads to a lot more guilt, and we've talked about that some, and I'll talk more about that in some upcoming slides. Whether or not, what was the type of death? Was it more peaceful? Was it a death during surgery, so it wasn't so peaceful? Was it considered an on-time death or an off-time death? And were people present? And as we're going to be getting into, we generally tried to encourage people, while giving permission, encourage them to be present at euthanasia, because we generally found that people were more likely to regret not being present in the long run than being present. But I know that isn't the right fit for everyone. And then in terms of social factors, how much social support do they have for this? What's the people around them? Are they considering this a valid loss, or are they minimizing it? Either because it's an animal or because it's a specific type of animal, like how much could you really be grieving a chinchilla or something like that? In general, pet loss has been disenfranchised. I think that's changing, but we haven't necessarily gotten time off work. For example, as of right now that I'm recording this, CSU's bereavement policy doesn't include pets. And we do tend to have more of a replacement philosophy. So you'd never just say to somebody, oh, well, if your aunt died, you can get another aunt, but you would say, well, if your cat died, you could get another kitty, right? Which can kind of minimize the grief experience. Okay, if you want to test yourself on this one, the answer is disenfranchised grief. This is your reading for the week, and it's a nice resource. It might be something that you share with other people or return back to when you're in a situation, experiencing the potential death of a pet. Okay, so I'm going to give you a really detailed sense of how I used to prepare people for client-present euthanasia for a couple of reasons. One is that I think this is just a model for how you might prepare somebody for anything difficult, surgery, for skydiving, any type of situation where somebody's really stressed and things are unknown in terms of what to expect. So the more we can walk people through something step by step, it eases anxiety and gives a greater sense of control. The other reason is this gives you a sense of what preparation for euthanasia specifically can sound like, so that when you're in that situation, you can be asking the vet or to explain it or to prepare people. I also found that, of course, we're going to prepare people right before the euthanasia, but I tended to prepare people weeks or months in advance, because generally when people find out that their dog, for example, has cancer and they're trying to figure out what to do, they're already starting to think about euthanasia. And I just said, if it's okay with you, I know that could be weeks or months away, but if you'd like, I can go ahead and tell you what to expect when that time comes. And I feel like for people, just knowing that they can wrap their mind around it, and because it's easier to kind of think about whether or not it's time to euthanize or whether or not you want to be present if you know what to expect. If you don't know what to expect, you can't even make those decisions. My experience a lot of times was that I would explain euthanasia to people. They were often crying while I was talking it through with them. And then afterwards, they had a sense of relief or calm and clarity. Many times people said, I actually think it probably is time. Like, we should schedule it this weekend, or soon. But before I explained it, they just couldn't decide because it was this big unknown thing. Okay. And I used very similar language when kids were present as well. Okay, so this is how I would have described it if you were coming to the CSU Veterinary Teaching Hospital. So I would say, okay, so when you arrive, we'll meet you in the waiting room, we'll take you back into an exam room, and we'll talk about where you'd like the euthanasia to take place. We have some big pads that we can place down on the floor of exam rooms, and we can lower the lighting so we can be all on the floor together if you'd like to be in an exam room. Or if the weather's permitting, we could go outside. We have a memorial garden area, we have a pond, there might be other areas that you'd like to select, and again, we can bring out big pads and towels and make everything comfortable out there. Once you come in, we'll take and talk things through again, and we'll prepare you again. Then we'll take Fluffy into the back and insert a catheter into her hind leg. And let me just pause and say, I'm giving you the scenario for dogs and cats. The preparation for exotics and large animals is different. Okay, so we'll take Fluffy into the back and we'll put a catheter, which is a little clear plastic tube, into a vein in her hind leg. We'll have to shave a little area for that and put some tape around that. And we do this so that when it's time for euthanasia and we're giving the special shots, the drugs that only animals can take, or the injections, that we don't have to worry about kind of hurting her at that time or finding a vein or anything like that. So we'll bring her back up to you. You'll see that little shaved area, the catheter and the tape, and then we'll see if you want some time alone with her before the euthanasia. And then, just as an aside there, if someone says, yes, I want 5 minutes, you should set your watch for 5 minutes and then come back. We never want to leave people for longer because it's such an anxious time. You can check back in and see if they want more time. Once you decide that it's time, then we are going to be down by her hind end where we've got the catheter, so that you can be up near her head. You can be kissing her, holding her, talking to her. You can be crying. I would be crying my eyes out, so please don't feel bad about being emotional. Do what you need to do to see her off. Once you decide it's time, we're going to give 3 injections into that catheter, the little clear plastic tube in her hind leg. The first one is a saline solution, just to make sure that the catheter is working. The second one is thiopental. It's a sedative, and it's going to make her really sleepy. And so if her head was up and she was looking around, her head's going to drop down like she's going to sleep. And then the third one is the euthanasia solution. It's a thick pink solution, and it takes us a few more seconds to push that in. But all in all, these 3 injections are given within about a minute. It's very fast, but after the 3rd injection is finished going in, her heart will stop most likely within a minute. We will take a stethoscope to monitor her heart so we can tell you for sure when her heart has stopped and she has died. You might expect here at the end, generally things are really peaceful. But you might see a little bit of kind of last breath or some slight movement. It takes muscles to close our eyes, so her eyes will stay open, not in a big staring way, but just in a kind of a half asleep way. Her little tongue, her jaw will open, her tongue will hang out. She might poop or pee, so we'll have some towels underneath her bottom. You can be obviously touching her, hugging her, holding her during euthanasia, and then afterwards we'll ask, if you want time alone again with her. We'll offer to make a paw print, a clay paw print. You could help with that. We'll see if you want to trim any fur to keep. Sometimes people would also ask if they could bring other animals or toddlers or friends. And our suggestion is, yes, you can bring whoever you'd like, but if you're bringing other animals, or like, for example, other dogs or 2-year-olds, you want to bring someone who could be in charge of them in case at the time of euthanasia they're just too disruptive. Then your friend or other family member could take them out, the dog or the toddler out, so that you could really focus on, your animal who was dying. Okay, so I have 3 slides here, how you can help before, during, and after death. And so before death, you can use your good communication skills, your acknowledging skills to acknowledge the significance of the bond. She's been such a source of support for you. She's been with you for the last 10 years. She's been with you through multiple moves and breakups, so just really acknowledging, what that animal has been. She's a connection to your childhood. And then you can also encourage them, if they're struggling with making the euthanasia decision, to call their vet, in advance and just have someone walk them through their options and what the procedure would look like. Similarly, we have a number of home euthanasia services now, and so you can also have a home euthanasia service. You can call them as well, have them prepare you. They will also come out in advance, assess your animal, and prepare you. And then you can also be giving people their body care options, which I'll talk more about in a second here. Again, you can be helping them think about euthanasia and their presence. We, again, generally encourage people to be present, but they usually have to know what to expect, and it has to be a well-facilitated euthanasia. You can help them just think about what arrangements they're going to make and kind of planning the ritual, where they want it to take place, at home, at the vet, outside, inside. And then you can help them think about kind of body care. So generally your options are burial or cremation, similar to human euthanasia. You can have the remains returned or not. And then disposal is only for animals, and that's where animals' bodies go to a landfill, not with trash, but just with other animals' bodies. And it's important that we're not vague about that. We need people to know that that's exactly what it is, so that they don't come back later and be like, you mentioned this mass grave and now I'd like to visit it, and you're sending them out to the landfill. So for some people, that wouldn't be the right fit for them, and for other people that's either all that they can afford, and they don't have a place to bury, or they don't mind, because they believe that the body is just a shell, or as one woman said, my dog loved the trash, so that's the perfect place for him. Okay, so if you are present around the time of death, again, you can help arrange the site, getting pads or mats out, or big blankets, towels, for poop or pee, helping people decide where. You can, again, make sure that the vet is reminding them for what to expect, so that they're not caught off guard. You're doing that, just, do what you need to do. Don't worry about us, all your acknowledging skills. And this is such a hard time, I would be crying my eyes out too, all of that. So helping them just encourage open displays of grief rather than kind of holding everything in. We'll talk about kind of helping to view the body in a second here. And you can also model touching and talking to the animal. And so sometimes people are scared during the death or after the death. It's like they don't want to touch their animal. And so you can just kind of, oh, sweet you, pet them, oh, that kind of thing, kind of gives them more permission. We can also, again, suggest linking objects. A lot of home euthanasia agencies will bring a clay paw print to make, or a little bit of fur clipping. And then you can invite some storytelling. So just like, at human wakes or memorial services, we tell stories. It's nice to do that with animals too. And so you might be sitting there after the euthanasia and everybody's been crying and we're petting her. And then I say something like, I bet so many memories are flying through your head right now. Are there any that you want to share? Or, something like that. And then people will start telling you stories, and it's that kind of, we laugh and then we cry again and then we laugh. It's a nice way to honor them. Okay, so if someone wasn't present at the death but wants to view the body, then it's always a good idea to give some thought in terms of body preparation. And I'll just back up and say, if you are there at the time that an animal has died and the person, their person isn't there, you can try to clean up the animal's body then and place it in a smaller container and kind of curl their legs around into a nice position while the body is still warm, because as you know, rigor mortis sets in within a few hours, and then you've got an animal in an awkward position either to view or to bury. Burying an animal with their legs straight out requires a much bigger hole than burying an animal when their legs are all tucked in. So just like an odd story, when I was doing this job, I was living next to some college students whose cat got hit by a car and they weren't home, and I brought the cat in from the road because I had been doing this kind of work, and I cleaned it up in my kitchen sink and I put it in a box, with towels and blankets, and curled it all up so that when they came home to this horrible experience, at least they were seeing their animal in a more peaceful position. Okay, so once we have someone ready to view them, we're preparing them for what to expect. That generally the eyes are open unless someone has glued them shut, that their little tongue might be hanging out, that there might be some injured, shaved, stitched areas, and that the body is generally kind of stiff and cold because they've probably been refrigerated or in a freezer. If possible, to kind of have the body out for a little bit so that it's not quite so freezing. It's still going to be very stiff. And then just like we've talked about, preparing people for not only what to expect, but what they can do. So it's okay to touch, talk to them, look under the blanket. Kids, it's okay to be curious. I can help prepare you if you want to look, under the blanket, or you want to see different parts of their body. Okay, so now after death, you're of course using all your skills around manifestations of grief and how to normalize that, and talking about primary and secondary losses, all of those same things that we've talked about with human loss. With animals, then two things that we really have to highlight are guilt. I often said things like, I have never talked to a pet owner who didn't feel some level of guilt after their animal died. We feel so responsible for them. And so it's normal to spend a few days kind of doing the what ifs and the could haves and the should haves and reviewing everything. Your brain is just probably going to do that. If someone was responsible or had a part in their animal's death, some of the things that I commonly said were, I know you would do anything to turn back the hands of time. I would talk about all the times that we all make mistakes. Like, we've all made mistakes with our pets, left a gate open, left the door open, didn't know where they were, and yet most of the time our mistakes don't lead to the death of an animal. And unfortunately, in your situation, it did, which is horrible. But again, mistakes, we all have those. We can also encourage people to imagine talking to their animal and telling them about their regrets and imagining what their animal would say back. And we can also talk about ways to make amends. So people, for example, who accidentally ran over their dog with a car might really make a point to educate other people about that, how you don't want to exercise your dog by driving the car along next to them. It's just too risky. Or educating people about the cords associated with blinds, which we've gotten rid of on new blinds, which is good because cats can get tangled up in them. The other thing you want to hit, besides guilt, is hallucinations. Those are common with human loss, but even more common with pet loss. People think they hear their pet come down the hall, click, click, click of the toenails, feel the pet jump up on the bed, hear them scratch at the back door, see them come over the fence out of the corner of your eye. That's really common, and people can feel like they're going crazy, but that keeps happening. And then you can help them brainstorm memorializing ideas, and I'll share some of those with you. And you can also, we always recommend still sending a condolence, those same kind of ideas that we talked about before, and sharing a memory about the pet, or how they talked about the pet. You can just, as you follow up with them in the weeks and months after, don't be afraid to bring up the pet's name. Like, oh, I saw the cutest little dog the other day and it reminded me so much of your JoJo. Or how are you doing after, Bessie died? You must be missing her. Those kinds of things. And then we're going to talk about replacement. But again, we generally didn't encourage quick replacement. Okay, so when talking to people about getting a new pet, I would often just say, you know what's right for you. And certainly I occasionally talk to people who said, this is what we do. When a dog dies, we go the next day and we get another one, But a lot of times that makes it hard, especially actually for kids. People are often doing it for the kids to help the kids not be sad, but it puts them in kind of a bind where they're grieving this one pet and now feeling guilty for not being able to attach to a new pet or enjoy a new pet. So you have to be ready for a different personality, because you're going to want the exact same one and you're going to be getting a different one. You have to be ready for the stress of a new pet. Having a new creature in your house is incredibly stressful. We used to talk to people about painting yourself a back door, which is basically adopting a pet for a trial period and seeing how it goes. Now, when you're doing adoptions like through PetSmart or through a shelter, they're not expecting it to be a trial. They're expecting you to sign off forever and ever. But I think it's okay to say to them, I know we're signing off here, but just so you know, and so our family knows, we are just doing this on a trial basis. We're doing it for this first week or these first 3 days or whatever it is, and we're going to see how it goes. As much as I knew this, I did make a mistake with my daughter, who had been begging for a kitten. And so for her 15th birthday, we got her a kitten as a surprise. Woo! And yet at the same time, it was coming with like, this kitten is going to be your responsibility, because that had been kind of what we've been saying. If you want a kitten, it's going to have to be your responsibility. And this kitten was challenging. It unfortunately had chronic diarrhea, and so that made it a big challenge. And it was very clingy. It probably should have been adopted with a sibling, which we learned our lesson on that, and so now we only adopt cats 2 at a time, because it was just too lonely when it was by itself, and my daughter was scared to sleep with it, and especially because it had chronic diarrhea, that made it hard. Anyway, whole long thing. I wish I had set that up as a trial rather than here's your new pet, because it was too stressful for her. And then it led to this battle in the family where my husband and my son were like, we have to keep Smudge. And Iris and I were like, we're not keeping Smudge. And, it just made it a lot more painful than it needed to be to give up Smudge if I had set it up as a trial. Okay, long story, but hopefully that drives the point home. And if you're visiting, consider, we're just going to the shelters today to practice. We're not bringing home a pet today. Okay, so I'm guessing a lot of you have had animals in your childhood, and so yeah, just reflecting on the animals that you've loved and maybe lost, your age, what this animal meant to you, what role they played in your life. Okay, so talking more about kids, I'm guessing many of you had experiences where your parents maybe lied about an animal dying, and they said it ran away. Or they told you it died one way, but it really died another way. So we recommend telling kids the truth, because you're generally sometimes just causing them one pain while trying to save them from another. So you tell them the animal ran away or went to live on a farm. Yeah, they're just worrying about how the animal's doing, or they feel abandoned by the animal. And then the other reason is that kids usually eventually find out that they were lied to. And then they wonder what else they've been lied about. So it's important to be honest. In terms of language, you've maybe been hearing that, and if you watched the Argus video, you heard some of this. We use language very concretely with kids: died, dead, or helped to die. So the veterinarian is going to give, Fluffy a shot that's going to help her to die peacefully. And it's a shot that only she can take, not like a shot that you get, when you go to get shots from your doctor. This is a special shot, a drug that only animals can take. Avoiding put to sleep, avoiding lost, those can be confusing for kids. And you don't want to bring up, religious practices or beliefs unless you know that the family believes in those. So I remember talking to a friend of mine actually, who they had to euthanize their dog, and the veterinarian, of course, brought up heaven, and now they had to spend the rest of the day not only intensely grieving their dog, but trying to explain to a 3-year-old what heaven was and why they didn't believe in it. So it added quite a bit of stress. So just like we're doing with adults, we're helping kids decide whether or not to be present. And again, we have to walk them through what to expect so that they can decide whether or not they want to be there. Or same with viewing a body, or same with kind of saying goodbye. We need to prepare them in language that they can understand. And, the examples that I've given you are, apply to kids. Kids generally are unfazed, especially the younger that they are. I never had a kid turn me down for helping to create a paw print, making a linking object following the death. They would work right along with me on that. They often wanted to carry those and hold those. I've maybe already walked you through, I think, how to explain body care to kids, how to explain burial and cremation, for example, but we have to kind of do that in language that they can understand. And while we're doing that, we're always reinforcing that non-functionality, irreversibility that we talked about in the children dying and grieving lecture. Fluffy can't feel anything, she doesn't need to breathe or eat, and she's not asleep. After she's died, she can't come back to life. Then we will brainstorm with kids how to memorialize. And so kids often had amazing ideas, of I'm going to draw a picture. Or I remember a little girl who was going as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz for Halloween, and then the dog died. So she was going to take the dog as Toto, but she just carried the leash and pretended Toto was there. Again, we can be, just like we talked about earlier, we can be really helping parents kind of model grief. We used to get calls from parents, that sounded like, the dog just died, the kids are going to be home in 30 minutes, and I'm a wreck. I got to help me pull it together. And we would say, it's okay to not pull it together. It would be weird for the kids to come home and find that the dog had died and you looked like you were fine. You can show them, what this grief looks like. Let's see. Again, we discourage quick replacement. I remember working with a boy, I think he was maybe around 11 or 12, and his black lab had died while he was maybe at summer camp or something, or gone for the weekend, and so his parents just bought another black lab that was there when he got home. And then they called because he was having a hard time attaching to this new pet. And so we spent I had a few conversations with him and talking how hard it was because he was just grieving so much the dog that had died, and this wasn't the same dog. And so we came up with some rituals. I brainstormed things with him, and he ended up choosing a balloon release where he wrote a note, to his dog that had died about how much he was missing her. And then eventually he began to I normalized that it's okay to not want to connect with this new dog, and there's nothing wrong with you right now, and eventually it'll happen, but it's going to take some time. And eventually it did, but he really needed permission to focus on grieving the dog he'd lost first. Okay, so my kids have been through a number of deaths of cats, 4 deaths of kitties. And the first one happened when Iris was 4 and Isaac was 8. And I'll just tell you some stories about that because it really illustrates their developmental stages. So this is my kitty Pocket. He's the bigger one there in the picture. He was 14 years old. He'd been declining for some time. And Isaac and I went to the vet on Thursday and kind of got the bad news that he was, kind of at the end of his life. Saturday, we had the Home to Heaven vet come to our house and prepare us. And then Sunday, we did the euthanasia. So here's some things I noticed. So Iris, during this time as a 4-year-old, had a very short attention span, yet that spontaneous creativity to honor. So I remember her walking up and bringing me a picture, of and you could barely understand what it was, of course, because she's 4, but like of a heart, a cat, and a couch, that kind of symbolized her love for Pocket. And then while the vet was there on Saturday kind of preparing us for what to expect and everything was really sad, she kind of just stood up in the middle of the conversation and said, "Can I have a fruit roll up?" Similarly, I was reading her pet loss books that day, and she just got up in the middle and said, "I'm done." And then the morning that Pocket was going to be euthanized, I was talking to her again about how Pocket was going to help her die, or the vet was going to help Pocket die later in the day. And then I was explaining how we were going to bury him afterwards. And it's like, that's when she just finally realized. She said, "We're going to bury him alive." And I had explained the non-functionality, irreversibility, but I said, no, he would be dead, that he wouldn't be able to eat, feel, breathe, see, or hear. And it's like, that's when it clicked. She cried for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then she wiped her tears and said, "I need to paint a rock to put on his grave." And so that's what she did. After euthanasia, we had an hour or 2 before we buried him because it took us that long to dig a hole. So note to self, you might want to dig the hole in advance. And so I think I may have told you that she was patting him during that time, and she held him a lot, which was disconcerting for me because she wasn't always holding him well, and he had this like floppy head, and seeing your 4-year-old hold your dead cat, it was hard, but I felt like it was important for her for grasping death. And she was saying, "He can't feel us petting him," or "He can't hear us talking." Like she was really grasping death. I prepared her, that his body would be different, but she kind of looked at his face, looked in his mouth. It was odd, but I also thought it was important. She was very involved in wanting to help lower him into the ground. What blanket would he be wrapped on? We planted flowers on top of the grave. She was involved in everything. Isaac, at 8, went with me to the vet. And I was explaining things to him, and I was talking about euthanasia. And I remember when the vet took him into the back to do something. Isaac was like, "Are they doing it right now?" And I was like, no, they're not doing it right now. It just made me realize I had to keep clarifying. I had to keep explaining. Isaac really didn't feel ready for the euthanasia, and he initially said no, we couldn't do it on Sunday. And I told him I didn't want to do it before he was ready, but I also didn't want Pocket to suffer. We needed to choose the right time for Pocket too. Isaac then said he was okay with Sunday, but then after the euthanasia, he had regrets. He said it was maybe too early, maybe we should have waited a day, and I just normalized that. I didn't try to talk him out of it. He wanted a new cat right away. He wanted to name him Pocket, get a black cat, and I talked to him about how that's normal to want that, but it wouldn't be the same. He kept a paw print, the collar, and he took those to school to show his friends, and we let his teacher know. Both kids regressed more following the death. Isaac was back-talking and antagonizing Iris. He also ended up accidentally breaking one of our windows by throwing something. Iris was more demanding and yelling, and that happened for several weeks afterwards. This was our second kitty who died, Sydney, the other little black cat in the picture, and Iris was 7 here. And I just remember she went to the computer and she typed this up and she printed it out and she brought it up to me. And Sydney, I think, was also older and starting to have some dementia, and she got into our neighbor's backyard and got attacked by their dogs, who were actually really nice dogs, but that kind of accelerated, her demise, and she died soon. We ended up euthanizing her soon after that. But you can hear Iris kind of processing this in a more concrete way. So here's some other things to say to kids that I either said as a professional or as a parent, but things like, yeah, grief feels yucky or awful. I don't like it either. I hate grieving. Or grief is like a rain cloud that comes and goes, and sometimes it can feel like this dark cloud is following us around. And if we can almost kind of poke it and make it rain, like let ourselves cry, then sometimes we can have some relief and feel better for a while. I often said things like, kids I have known have felt mad, sad, scared, out of sorts. You might have a lot of different feelings. They're all normal. It's okay to be curious. You might find that it's hard to behave well when you're missing so-and-so, and you might get into trouble a little bit more. That's important actually to say in front of caregivers and parents too, so that they cut their kids some slack. Asking about the hardest times of day, and then coming up with maybe a ritual around that we light a candle, or we sing a song, or we play a song, or something, and we talk to them. And then if you're the caregiver and you're upset, you might be saying things like we've talked about, I just need to have a good cry and then I'll feel better, or I'm sad but I can still take care of you. There's lots of great children's books. These are older, so you probably can find even better ones. And there's ones that are less, more, for example, more specific to heaven, and then those that are, more broad about what happens after we die, including that little book called Where Love Goes. Some address euthanasia, some don't. So you can always ask a children's librarian to pull the books on children and pet loss for you, and then go in and look through them, or you can use Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Okay, so really a lot of the memorialization ideas that we've talked about with humans still apply to pets, and you can see those listed here. And so we can be helping people brainstorm what would feel right to them, to lean into their grief, to honor their pet. For example, one thing that I learned from a friend of mine was in burying my first kitty. I was having a hard time thinking about my kitty being in the ground, and she said, one thing that had helped her is she put copies of pictures of her with her cat down in with them, along with flowers and things like that, so that when she pictured her animal in the ground, she was picturing them with a lot of love, around them. So just doing those kinds of conversations where people are struggling and trying to brainstorm, what might feel like the right thing. Here's just another helpful video for parents or older kids or teens experiencing the death of a pet that you can have in your resources. Okay, you all. You have made it to the end of the last lecture in this class. So much good but tough material that you've listened to. So, way to go, you. And also continue to take care of yourself. Take some deep breaths, look around, notice the outdoors, and hope the rest of your day goes well.